Welcome to the Export to Japan podcast.
Export to Japan.
のポッドキャストへようこそ。
Bringing you the latest information on the Japanese market and doing business in Japan from the British Embassy in Tokyo.
For the web's richest resource for companies looking to do business in Japan, visit exporttojapan.jp.
And now, today's host, Steve Crane.
Welcome to the Export to Japan podcast. Today I'm joined by Robert Heldt. Robert is a Tokyo-based entrepreneur who, after beginning his career in advertising, founded his company Custom Media in 2008. Now, in their 10th year, Custom Media has gone from strength to strength. Among many others, it publishes the journals of the British Chamber of Commerce in Japan and the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan. It's also the company behind Business in Japan TV, an online bilingual video channel about successful entrepreneurs, executives, and companies doing business here in Japan. I had a great conversation with Robert today about the intricacies of social media in Japan. We covered the key numbers of most of the popular platforms, and we dived into the details of the demographics and user base that each platform maintains. Throughout the conversation, Robert gave us some great insights into what sets the Japanese social landscape apart from other markets and what you should consider before publishing your first post in Japanese. And without any further preamble, we bring you Robert Heldt. So I'm sitting here with Robert right now. Robert, welcome to the Export to Japan podcast.
Thank you for having me, Steve, and it's good to be back.
Yeah, we're delighted to have you back with us. So for this discussion, Robert, we're going to learn all about social media and the trends in Japan, and I'm looking forward to picking your brains on that. And just for the help of our listeners right now, I plan to sort of generally break this down into three topic areas. So first of all, I'm going to ask you to give us a brief overview of the whole sort of landscape in Japan and the various different social media options. Then I want to ask you a little bit more about the do's and don'ts and learn from some of your experiences of what's worked well, but also a little bit about what's not worked so well. And then I want to move on to your thoughts on more strategic advice and solutions based on your experience in Japan. So we'll come on to those two sections a little bit later, if that's okay with you. But to kick things off, I'd really like to ask you to give us a sort of a brief overview of what channels are available in Japan, what are popular, and why are they popular?
Sure. Well, Twitter is the most popular social media channel in Japan. At the moment, it has about 45 million active users and shows no signs of slowing down. It's gained popularity since the 2011, earthquake and natural disasters. And just the fact that users can be anonymous and that Japanese language tweets can communicate a lot more information as part of the reasons why it's very popular. And Facebook is the second most popular channel, has about 28 million active users in Japan. Facebook's growth is stagnating. However, it is slowly maintaining its relevance in the market. And Instagram is the most rapidly growing social network in Japan, has about 20 million followers. And also the fact that it provides users an opportunity to be anonymous, and the layout and highly visual aspects of the channel is also appealing to users.
Okay, that's very interesting. So just to sort of summarize that, I think we're dealing with a population here in Japan of about 120 or 125 million people, I think, aren't we? So of that population, you're saying Twitter has around 45 million active users, Facebook 28 million active users, and Instagram 20 million active users. Facebook's a little bit stagnant in terms of its growth, but Twitter and Instagram are very much on a growth curve upwards, right? Would that be a fair summary? Yeah, okay, got that. Now, we'll dive into the detail of a little bit more of those three that you've mentioned in a few minutes, but I'm curious to see that you didn't actually mention LinkedIn there. So could you tell us a little bit about the current situation with LinkedIn in Japan?
LinkedIn doesn't go well with the Japanese social culture or business culture. Well, if you consider it, LinkedIn is seen more of as a job site than, a social media channel. So I think Japanese, business people are quite wary of putting their information out there. And God forbid any of the bosses sees their profiles online, so they might mistake it for them looking for jobs. And but that trend is changing, though. You see a lot more younger Japanese, in their 20s that are joining the LinkedIn platform, and also a lot of internationally minded Japanese business people are active on the channel. So there is room for growth for LinkedIn, and there are things that they can do to reach the Japanese users, but it's definitely not the ideal social media channel for Japanese.
Okay.
And that's part of the reason. And one other channel is, of course, Line. Line is very popular. They've got about 71 million active users, but it's more of a communication chat channel rather than a social media channel. But that being said, Line is very innovative in the service offerings. They have live news feeds. They have launched Line payment gateway services, shopping, jobs, music, a variety of services targeting the end user. So they have a very active, I think about 90% of the 71 million Line fans are active on a daily basis on the app. So it's pretty amazing.
Is Line a sort of Japan-specific platform?
No, it's a global platform. It's launched by a Korean company,
right?
And it's very popular in Japan as a chatting app.
Okay, very good, useful. Any others in particular? I mean, they're the main ones we've gone through, but are there any others out there on the radar that you're aware of at all?
Yes, there's one called Snow, launched by Line just about a year and a half ago. It's very similar to Snapchat, and it's very popular in Japan because unlike Snapchat, users of Line, Snow can edit pictures, add funny faces, and several other features that allows them to then share that content on other social media channels, such as Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and so on. So Snow is one of the up-and-coming, popular social media channels that's owned by Line, and Line is investing a lot in that platform.
Okay. So that's a good overview and introduction, Robert. In terms of diving in a little bit deeper on some of this stuff then, so what can you tell us about your knowledge of any demographics for those key channels that you've mentioned? Could you expand on that a little bit more?
Yes. I mean, Twitter, for example, you about 35% of the Japanese population is on Twitter, if you look at it that way, and of which 45% are female and 55% are male users. The interesting fact about Twitter is the most active audience, the most active group are in their 20s, followed by the 30-year-olds and then the 40-year-olds. If you take Facebook, on the other hand, about 22% of the population, Japanese population, are on Facebook, and 43% female, 37% male demographic, right? Whereas if you look at the active number of fans on Facebook, 40% of them are in their 40s. So the most active age group are in their 40s, which is an interesting stat for a brand or a product, because the 40-year-olds have better spending power, and they are well traveled, and they are well engaged,
probably likely to be in more decision making positions. When you're talking about the difference with B2C and B2B, these kind of people might be in more powerful positions in their companies to make decisions over budget or things like that. So
exactly,
yeah, that's very interesting.
Instagram is a growing, very popular social media channel. It's growing rapidly. 56% female, 44% male. And the interesting stat here, females like to take a lot of pictures, share pictures. So it's a very interesting, trend on Instagram. The most active audience are in their 30s, followed by the 20s. It's definitely for a younger, generation.
Okay, that's excellent. Now, this is clearly a rapidly evolving sector, and you've given us some hints there of some of the changes that are going on in the dynamics of each platform. What about the sort of trends that you're spotting? Have you got any thoughts on things to look out for and things that are happening in the market right now?
Yes, I think more and more live video streaming is becoming popular. You can do live streams on Twitter. Facebook's introduced their live, stream as well. Instagram, of course, and has also introduced something called Stories, where you can stream live events. Of course, YouTube was the one that started it off with their, live videos feeds. Chatbots are becoming popular these days to respond to customer service. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is with all this content, there's just too much content out there. So Snapchat is an interesting social media channel because, your content expires immediately after you post it. So expiring content is going to be a new trend where you post something for just a short duration of time, such as, Instagram stories. It's a lot more difficult, with the paid model for advertising on Facebook and Twitter and so on to organically grow your traffic. So you need to think about how you invest in advertising to promote, your channel. And there's also, growth in virtual reality and augmented reality, which is going to be interesting to see how those trends develop. Yeah. And finally, I think social media influencers is a big trend. So, brands are engaging with influencers that have a big fan base of big following so that they can distribute their brand's message, similar to how brand ambassadors work in advertising. So social media influencers, they could be, your well-traveled blogger or, your fanatic of your brand.
Okay, very good. Well, I want to come back to some of those points you've mentioned very shortly when I ask you a little bit more of some of your sort of strategic advice on how overseas brands should be thinking about entering the market. But before we get into that section, I'd really be curious to get your thoughts on some of the stories and anecdotes and things you've picked up over the years. I mean, your company, Custom Media, have got I don't know how many years, 10 years, is it? You recently celebrated a 10th anniversary, didn't you? So you guys have picked up a ton of skills and experience with all the companies you've worked with over the last 10 years. So you've obviously had a chance to see things that work well and some stories that have gone well, but also perhaps one or two things that haven't gone so well. So what would be some of your thoughts you could share with us on where companies do things correctly, what goes well and also what goes wrong? Could you share a few thoughts on that?
I think the very first thing for companies to keep in mind is, not to get into this mad rush of getting on social media. We often get requests from companies, brands, wanting to get on social media, but they don't have a clue as to why they want to get on social media and what are their objectives, once they are there. So we try to slow them down to get them to take a step back to analyze why they want to be on social media to start with. And then based on that, try to get them to understand who their audience is, what are their objectives for the channel, and then choose the right channel. We just discussed, the various demographics of each of the top 3 channels. So if you look at those top 3 channels and look at their demographics, you should be able to plan which channel is most suited for your brand or your product or service. So once you understand that, once you understand your audience better, then you can build a strategy that, blends well with your objectives. Often we discourage brands from getting on social media if they don't know what their goal is all about.
Yeah, okay. One little interesting question I want to ask you about the way you actually do it from your experience. So I know at Custom Media, you are a company based here in Tokyo, but in essence, you're run by 2 foreigners, yourself and your partner, Simon. In terms of the delivery of your social media on behalf of your clients, presumably that's pretty much all done in Japanese, right? Or not? Or am I making the wrong assumption? I mean, could you tell us a bit more about how that works?
Yeah, at Custom Media, we're a bilingual content creator. So all the content we produce are either in English or Japanese or both languages. So it depends on the client, depends on their target audience. Our project management team and strategic team, meets with the client to understand their goals, understand their objectives, and then produce the content, in sync with them. So that's one of the benefits of, working with Custom Media, for example. We can get everything done in-house, from the strategy and planning to the execution, implementation and execution stages.
Got it. Okay, that's perfectly explained. Thank you. Okay, so just coming back to this point then, how about some advice on what companies shouldn't do when they think about entering the Japanese market or developing their social media plan for the Japanese market?
The first thing they should do is have a plan. Like I mentioned earlier, is social media, relevant for you, and what channel should you be on? What, who are your demographics? And once you have a plan, then hire, in-house team or work with an agency who understands social media, who understands the way these channels work, and then be active. Once you start to be on a channel, once you've chosen a channel, be active on the channel, produce content. But also, it's important to have a tone of voice, build a brand personality, and be original, not just post for the sake of posting or tweet for the sake of tweeting, and to respond proactively to your customers.
So the things they shouldn't do?
Well, the very first thing that I would recommend any brand or company not to do is to hire an intern and think that an intern would be able to manage your social media. Why would you entrust your brand that you built over these years to an intern to start with? That's where many companies go wrong. So it's good to have interns to probably help you with it, help you to understand their thinking. They might be your target audience demographic, but don't entrust your social media channel to them. It's important to get that right at the start. Hire professionals and build a team who understands social media, right? And again, when you're promoting or posting content, don't overdo it. Don't spam, your users. It's not about the quantity of the post, it's the quality of the post, the quality of the content that's important. It's also important not to ignore any comments from fans, any remarks or questions or negative comments. Some brands have this tendency of deleting bad comments or negative comments. It's only going to hurt your brand in the long run, when you think about it. So you might as well address it, come up front and talk to your fan base, try to figure out what the problem is and address it rather than just deleting and hoping it goes away. And then it's also important not to just reply with stock posts. So if somebody's commented something, just saying thank you doesn't really cut it. And try to be original, try to personalize it. It's, of course, to maintain workload, you might have a set of stock answers, but mix them up and use them in various situations. So it's not robotic. And it's also important to remember that the end, the consumer is human. So don't try to be too formal, just to be personal and just have a general conversation, because that's what social media is all about. It's a platform to engage with your audience, right? So if you think of it that way, it's best to be informal and have a tone of voice so that you know what your brand represents.
Okay. They are outstanding tips, actually. It's very good to hear you talk through those, and it makes perfect sense with what you're saying. And yet I can imagine it's obviously experience you're talking from, and I can imagine some companies fall into the trap of doing some of those things, but it does seem so obvious when you say it like that they are the things that companies definitely shouldn't do. Now, one other question that it provokes in my mind, though, as I hear you talking through that, Robert, when we think about some of the foreign companies listening into this podcast and some of those brands out there that are maybe at that early stage of thinking about their social media strategy for Japan, and they might be thinking to engage with an agency like yours, for your company to be able to support some of those foreign brands with dealing with some of those issues, like how to respond to negative comments and how to turn that around in a constructive way or whatever, that sounds to me like you guys would have to have a very close relationship with the client and understand their product or their service and their customer service levels and stuff like that. I mean, how does that work in reality with you and your clients? How do you form that relationship? Could you give us a bit of an overview on that for the listeners?
Yes, certainly. I think the very first thing we do is if it's a product-based company is we take time to learn about those products. We undergo training with the client to understand their products, understand their strategy, understand their consumers. So we do spend time with understanding the products or the services, and we have training with them, understand their their customer service responses, understand how they interact with their brands, because we represent the brand, so we need to be as a part of their organization. So we become an extension to their organization, not just a third-party vendor. So we take the time to engage ourselves fully with the client, to understand their product, their services, and then to represent them as an employee of their organization, if you may. And how we help them is by understanding the consumers as well, because we are engaging with the consumers on their chosen social media platform. We get to understand what type of issues or what type of information that consumers are looking for. So we create the content that's of help to the consumers.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to be a part of the brand, to be a part of the company, to understand and represent them.
Yeah, I get that totally, and that becomes so apparent in the way you're answering those questions, because the points you raise of the things to look out for are absolutely right, but of course you've got to make sure in your delivery you actually deliver that, haven't you, and act on that. And that's why in a challenging market like Japan, when the overseas brands are looking to come in here, and there are not just the language barriers, but the whole cultural barriers too, I can see why it's got to be such a close relationship if they choose to work with an outsourced agency like yours. Yeah. Okay. Very good. All right. Well, let's move on. So I guess the next point I want to really get into with you does sort of link in a little bit with what we were discussing there. So it is starting to pick your brains a little bit from your years of experience on the strategic advice that you give and the way you work with clients and the solutions that you offer. So just to expand a little bit on what you were saying in the previous section, I mean, where does a foreign company start when they come into the Japanese market and they're considering social media? I mean, what would be the advice or the thoughts you should give them when they start out?
Well, the very first step is to decide whether they need to be on social media, and if the answer is yes, then decide what channel is most suitable for their objectives. So establishing that objective at the start and understanding their audience is very important and very critical. Just again to reiterate, as we just discussed, the channels are different, offer different solutions, different audiences. So it's very important to be sure as to what channel you pick and why that channel is relevant to your organization or your brand or your part of your communication strategy. So once you've got that decided, then it's easier for you to start to build the channel. And later, if you feel that you can improve and you can get on other channels, sometimes we get requests, say we want to be on social media, we want to be on Facebook, and we want to be on Instagram, but no clear reason why both channels are one channel. So sometimes it's good to start with one channel, the right channel, and then if there is demand, if there is a need, you can expand. It's easier than to build out another channel or a third channel.
So you can kind of scale up your activity once you start to learn and understand it. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then the next point is content. Content is still king. So it's not about overdoing the content. It's not about putting out a lot of content. It's very important to establish your brand standards, establish your tone of voice, and then create content that's going to be relevant to your audience and useful information. So if you think about it as a consumer and as probably a user of social media, you get this constant flow of feed of content from various brands. So how much time do you spend? How much time do you engage with the content that you receive, right? So it's important to make sure the content is of use to your audience, and it should be educational, informative, and engaging. So then you want to, share it with your network, for example. Mm-hmm. And it's important also to, personalize your content so that it's, it has an effect on the end, fans.
Okay. Do you, on that point, Robert, do you have a view that when foreign brands are looking to come into Japan, their content plan or their content approach should possibly be different because of any particular dynamics of the Japanese market? Should they be looking to have a local content plan?
Absolutely, yes. So if the Japanese audience is your end audience, then you need to make sure that your content plan is tailored for your Japanese audience, and that could be from the the text, the images, the type of information your market is looking for, all that can change. It's not just the language. It's about, what's of value to them as a consumer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Very good.
Yes. And so once you've got your audience set and you've got your content, the most important thing, of course, for anything is to make sure it's working, right? So it's important to analyze, to make sure that your content is reaching the right audience, to make sure you're getting the growth that you're looking for. So at the start, it's important to establish those KPIs and to establish, achievable KPIs. Sometimes, we get brands saying, oh, we want to reach 100,000 followers. But it's not followers that's always important. It's the reach. If you want to reach 100,000 people with your message, then you shouldn't have to worry too much about, the number of followers that your brand or your channel, builds. So you need to focus on getting your message out to 100,000 people versus building a fan base of 100,000. If you have a fan base of 100,000 and they're not engaging, you might as well not have that fan base. So it's important to set KPIs that are, going to deliver the results that you want, and use, analytical tools. I would recommend highly to invest in analytical tools. There's so many tools out there. There are paid services, there are free services as well, to get that content, analyzed on a regular basis, to make sure that, you're doing the right thing, that your audience is engaging, and if they're not, what steps you're taking to fix that, and how you can proactively address that, rather than run a campaign for 6 months and then realize, oh, it didn't work, so let's shut it down. That's one of the beauties of digital media. You can analyze data on a ongoing basis and then update your campaign to suit the needs. Yeah, right. Okay. So,
just another little question on that, Robert. Again, from your experience with the various range of clients you've worked with, what if I'm one of those foreign brands listening into this podcast right now and I'm thinking about doing a campaign in Japan for the first time to help promote my product or my service? What would you say is the typical kind of time scale I should be thinking about in terms of sort of making my investment and when I might see results and how long it might take to get traction? What would be your sort of, I know that's probably a bit of a how long is a piece of string question, but just in general terms, what do you tend to feel?
I would say it's 6 months is a good time frame. The first 3 months, you're setting up the strategy, you're setting up a plan, you're building, your fan base, so you're building your messaging strategy, and then, so you have a first quarter to analyze how that's going, whether you've launched the way you want to launch and communicate the message you want to communicate, and if it's getting traction, and then over the next, 3 months, you can see, how the results are, what results are being delivered, and then tweak the campaign to go. I think from start, maybe a 6-month campaign to start with will give you a better idea as to, whether your objective is on track. Mm-hmm. And then another 6 months to see, if it's a successful campaign.
Yeah. Okay. Another little question that's provoked in my mind is when you speak about measuring your performance and maybe learning from that and adjusting your future plans and your behavior. The Japanese consumers, if we think about B2C marketing through social media, the Japanese consumers and the way they behave, are there any differences in their online behavior? Things like the way they comment or share or anything like that? Any differences that you would recommend that our listeners should be thinking about?
Yes, certainly. I think, in general, Japanese consumers are, quite reserved and they're not very open, or they don't comment too publicly compared to, let's say, other Asian, consumers like probably the Philippines or Indonesia, for example. So when they have a comment and when they have feedback to share, it's very genuine, and you should pay attention. Unlike other countries, you might get a lot of likes and shares and tweets and overactivity, and you feel, wow, my brand's really getting a lot of engagement. Well, actually, are they meaningful engagements? That's a difference here. Right. I think you get meaningful engagement from any Japanese consumer interaction, which is very important because they are actually paying attention to your message, to your communication. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a difference to keep in mind. So then when you're creating content, you need to create content that's thought-provoking, that's engaging with them, that piques their interest. So I think it's very important to make sure you have that as part of your strategy. And if you feel, well, why is it's working in Indonesia, why is it not working in Japan? Often we get that as well. Oh, it's working in Korea, but it's not working in Japan. So you need to think local, think about how the Japanese consumers behave online, and try to adapt your strategy around that, rather than just thinking what works in other markets should work here.
So do you think here in Japan it's a little more difficult and a little more challenging because the Japanese consumer doesn't necessarily engage so easily? You've really got to work a little bit harder to get that message out there in the right way to get the engagement.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, okay.
You should.
Okay, so I guess that's one of the things that you have to work hard on behalf of your clients, right?
Exactly. And also setting expectations, as I mentioned earlier, achievable KPIs, just rather than, setting, lofty ambitions. Okay, we need, 100,000 followers in 6 months or in a year. Try to understand, what exactly is more important, and then set those expectation levels accordingly. Or we need our, 20% engagement rate. Again, what does that 20% mean for you? It's more important to look at that rather than just putting stats on a page and saying, I need this kind of expectations. Yeah. Because often, we deal with, brand directors that set these percentages without thinking about what those percentages mean. I think it's trying to understand what those percentages mean rather than just numbers.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, very good. Well, I think we're sort of covering most of the topics that I certainly wanted to in this podcast, and it's been very illuminating. Just as we get towards a wrap up, are there any particular kind of final comments or any advice that you'd have for our listeners today, Robert?
Yes, I think allocate a lot of time for social media, because social media is a 24/7 living organism. So you need to really think about it that way, because, while your brand is not engaging with them, your consumers are engaging with you. And, you need to keep that in mind when you're creating content or creating campaigns. So often we find that, companies don't, know how long it takes or how much, effort it takes to be on social media. So keep that in mind when you're planning a strategy, and, keep that in mind when you're hiring your team, who's going to do what. Also, engagement is key, as I mentioned as well. Engagement is more important than just, creating a big fan base. If you have a fan base that's not engaging, then again, you might as well not have the channel. And especially on channels like Twitter, where it's not about sending out one tweet a day. It's about current activities, current information. So when you're engaging with them and you're sharing information about a current situation or a current topic, it's more meaningful for them because you're having a conversation with them. So unlike, for example, Facebook, where you post something and people share it, Twitter is more like a conversation, platform, so you can have that meaningful engagement with your fan base. So it's important again to understand the usage of each of those channels and how do consumers use them, which will help you then to have a more meaningful interaction with your customers and build, brand equity. And then, finally, I think it's very important. I must reiterate that you should, look at this as a strategy and work with the right team, work with the right agencies who understand the market, who understand marketing, and also who are able to deliver, the results you are looking for.
Okay, that's great. And kind of on that point, Robert, we certainly appreciate you coming along and giving us your time today to share a wonderful range of experiences and a really good overview of the current social media market in Japan. It's clear that you've got a lot of experience, but we all know this is a very crowded space. It's a fast-growing space. There's a lot of experts out there and specialists out there and companies out there willing to help foreign brands into the market. You at Custom Media have clearly been hugely successful. I've watched your growth over the last 10 years, and you guys are always continuing to move on and be innovative and work with exciting new clients and do amazing stuff. From your perspective, as you've grown your business, what are the sort of unique points or the differentiators that you could say to those foreign brands that might consider working with Custom Media? What makes you guys so special, and what are the unique points that you could offer our audience?
I think just the fact that we are a bilingual agency, and you're bicultural as well. It's not just about having, the ability to service in two languages. Understanding culture is very important, especially in a country like Japan, is extremely important. And we have a full in-house team of producers. As I mentioned, we've got editors, content creators, strategists to come up with those ideas and campaigns, and we've got the production capabilities of graphic designers and web developers and video producers all in-house. So again, social media is such a fast-paced environment. You need to be able to turn around and produce that content in a very short time frame. So having all those resources in-house enables us to help our clients get ahead of the competition and get those campaigns out in a more rapid pace than if you were to do it all in-house, in a company, and you hire one social media person, they need to be able to multitask and be able to be good at editing images, writing copy, translating them, posting them, monitoring them. So it's a team's job. It's not a one-person job. So and so we've got the various skill sets all under one roof in our organization. That's the added value we bring to our clients. And by being bilingual and bicultural, we're able to adapt to both HQ's expectations and the local market's expectations as well. So that's kind of our added advantage, if you
Very
may.
Clear. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and yeah, very valuable information for our listeners. So once again, Robert, I just want to thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing those wonderful wisdoms with us. A big thank you for your ongoing support for the Export to Japan platform. I know you guys do a lot to support us and support those UK companies out there that are looking to come into the market. I hope all of you listening in, wherever you are in the world and whatever time you're listening to this podcast, I hope you found that informative and useful. Please feel free, if you have any questions for Robert, or if there's anything that his company Custom Media can help you with, reach out to Robert. You can Google him, you'll find him on LinkedIn, you can find his company and his website, not difficult to find him. Reach out to Robert if he can help you with anything. And of course, if there's anything that us at the Export to Japan team can help you with as well, never hesitate to get any questions or comments into us. But it just finally leaves me to say a huge thank you, Robert. We really appreciate you being on board with us today. Really informative stuff. And yeah, thank you once again.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's great to be back, and I'm glad we could have this conversation, and I look forward to working with you.
Great. Thank you.
If you'd like more information about exporting to Japan or the Japanese market in general, visit exporttojapan.jp. If you have a question for us, send it to info@exporttojapan.jp. Thank you for listening.